Welcome back to Living in Mexico. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you so much for joining us once again. Our X account is at Mexico Daily. Also, please follow me on my personal X account, which is AM Salazar. We provide information, news, analysis about what's going on in Mexico, both in English and in Spanish. Thank you so much for joining us throughout the years. We have to talk about judicial elections this weekend. It's an historical moment for Mexico. There's a lot of doubts as to what's going to happen. Not necessarily on Sunday. I think we have a pretty good sense what could potentially happen. It's what's going to happen after. What is Mexico's judicial system going to look like after this very controversial constitutional reform? In fact, the Financial Times called this reform very Kafkaesque, and that did bother President Claudia Sheinbaum because they do believe, or at least they claim to believe, that this is a way of democratizing Mexico's judicial system and that Mexico will be better for it. There's others who believe that that having electing judges is going to be an historical mistake. That's why I really do appreciate today's guest joining us one more time to talk about judicial reform. Carlos Ramirez from Integralia. Integralia just published one last report before elections take place this weekend. Carlos, with the information we have right now, how would you classify this judicial reform? Is it Kafkaesque, but maybe in the long run it could strengthen Mexico's democracy, strengthen Mexico's judicial system? Or do you simply think this is just going to be a disaster and it's going to take Mexico years to recuperate from? So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ana Maria, for having me. It is quite a paradoxical situation right now in Mexico, in which Mexicans, when asked if they want this election, if they are happy with the idea of voting, deciding by vote the new judicial branch, most of them, I would say, a big chunk of Mexicans say they are happy with this idea of democracy through popular vote for the judicial branch. The problem is when you start to ask people if they understand exactly what they are voting, if they understand what the institutions they are voting for, what do that institutions do, what is their importance, why do they exist, and moreover, and more importantly, if they know who they are gonna cross the name of in the ballot on Sunday, right? If they understand who the people are, who they are gonna vote for, if they know something about them, they know their career, where they come from, what they have done during their professional life. And the answer there is no clue. Mexicans are gonna go to the ballots, the relatively low number of Mexicans that are gonna go to the ballot, clueless, without any idea on what they are selecting and what exactly does that mean. So answering your question, this idea of putting to vote anything, and that meaning in the mind of the president and some people, that putting to vote the judicial branch, a constitution, is by itself something more democratizing than the regular traditional status quo form of deciding the judicial branch names, is absolutely wrong. It's absolutely wrong. But let's put it this way. Mexicans believe this is positive, although they clearly don't understand. So in my view, although the report we published tries to give, let's say, both sides of the story, it doesn't judge what is the final outcome gonna look like. But Personally, I think it is a setback for democracy. And moreover, the names of who are going to be selected, and we can talk about that, are already relatively predetermined by the same government. So the judicial branch at the end of the day is going to look very close to what the government wants that branch to look like, which it was always the end game of this exercise.
Which, and that's what's so infuriating. In part, is the misinformation in terms of what are the real objectives of this reform, and two, as to how viable. I mean, and what is the role of the judicial branch? And maybe our generation should assume our responsibility of not really explaining or not promoting a democratic culture to protect us or to protect Mexico from what's going on right now. Well, not only Mexico, but we have to say in the United States. I mean, I think, our generation just took for granted that these democratic, this route that Mexico had taken in the last 30 years would continue.
Yeah,
And it was, I mean, there was a lot of, blood and sweat in
absolutely.
trying to do these reforms. That's why it's so shocking, scary, disappointing, because you just don't know where this is going. Because at least in terms of how we view the world, that you have to have three branches of power, and democracies need to make sure that each branch of power has a certain level of independence, and that each, they're just checks and balances. I mean, that view of the world
Yes,
is gone, for at
yes,
least for
absolutely,
Mexico. And
absolutely.
that's
Yeah,
what I think is just so frustrating. And it may work out. I mean, maybe, in a couple of years, these judges that are being elected today will eventually gain enough experience and will become responsible judges. I just don't see that happening. I mean, I look at these candidates, I'm like, really? Do you have the temperament to be that, us lawyers talk about temperaments. Do you have the judicial temperament to be a criminal lawyer, a criminal judge? So, I mean, I'm concerned, but this is the reality we live in. And I guess the question is, how many people do you think are going to go out and vote? Do you
yeah.
have any sense?
So, I mean, there has been a couple of polls published during this week that put the number something close to the 20%. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
In Integralia, we believe it's going to be something lower, probably in the order between 10 and 15%, which
Mm-hmm.
is a very, very, very low turnout. So
Right.
just in comparison, last year in a presidential election, 61% of Mexicans voted
Mm-hmm.
during that process. 15% is a very low number and speaks by itself. That's, I think, it's a very clear message, Ana Maria, in the sense that Mexicans, although they say they express interest, or at least
Mm-hmm.
uh, they express positive signs into what we are doing, this experiment, that, by the way, it is the only place in the world that the judicial branch is going to be selected by popular vote. The only one. No
Right.
other country in the world, because in other countries, there are small examples of local judges in Bolivia, the Supreme
In the
Court, but
United
no,
States,
yeah, no
in the
country.
United States, they have election, which has also been very frustrating because
Yeah, but
the
local
government has
judge.
been using. That's right. They've been
Yes.
using the U.S. example as a way of, the U.S. lawyers have no right even to
Yeah.
question, and it is question. I mean, when you look at the election of judges in the
Yeah.
United States, which are local judges, I mean, it's literally like jueces de paz, I think would be kind of the comparison. It's very, low level judges. And even in some places, there's some Supreme Court state judges. I mean, at the end of the day, most analysts would tell you it is not a good idea
It
to
doesn't
have
work.
judges
Yeah.
It
It
just is
doesn't
not
work.
a good idea for judges to campaign, and you don't want politicians as judges, basically, and that's
Absolutely.
what's happening. And the United
Yeah.
States is not a good example.
It
The
is
United
not
States
a
is
good example.
definitely not a good
Yeah.
example.
And even less so Bolivia, which
Oh
in
my God, Bolivia is a
is a disaster.
disaster.
Is
Yep.
a disaster. So going back to your question, so maybe 15% of Mexicans will go out
Mm-hmm.
to vote. But we are
Mm-hmm.
seeing, Ana Maria, something which is very, very, let's say, worrying from a democracy point of view, but relatively
Mm-hmm.
expected. During the past
Mm-hmm.
weeks, we have seen this so-called acordeones, which are cheat sheets, right?
Cheat sheets.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Which
that's the
have
correct
been,
translation, by the way. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, everywhere people are, I mean, the party in power is interested in influencing the very small limited of people that are going to go and vote. And the question
Right.
is why? Why
Mm-hmm.
this does this sheets have come out? It is very clear why. Because
Mm-hmm.
nobody understands the ballots,
Mm-hmm.
are very confusing. Too many names. There is simply no way Mexicans can get to understand who the people are they are going to vote
Mm-hmm.
for. So, what the government is doing, although obviously they will never accept this, but they are trying to push for names that are comfortable for power, for the government. So, the likely outcome, Ana Maria, is that we're going to have a very politicized judicial branch as expected. This is
Mm-hmm.
nothing new. I think what we've seen during the past 2 or 3 weeks is even worse, probably, than what we expected in the sense of how openly uh, this distortion of democracy is happening as we
Mm-hmm.
speak. Because people are not going to vote freely. They're going to
Yeah.
take a piece of paper with the names, numbers of, well, not even the names, the numbers of who they have to pick for. So by at the end, our report at Integralia puts, let's say, both sides of the discussion
Mm-hmm.
in perspective. We are expecting low turnout, a very slow process of of the numbers, the final numbers, because this is the first time Mexicans will not count the votes. First time in 30 years. The votes are going to be counted by bureaucrats of the National Electoral Institute. And so this election brings a lot of new things, things that we never expected to see, and things that goes against the credibility and
Mm-hmm.
the, let's say the credibility of this election overall.
But there is, I mean, I do question whether the opposition or those of us who think this was a mistake, whether we should have done more to either make sure the correct candidates were appeared on the ballots, or candidates who have experience or who we trust would be good judges, magistrates, or justices, or at least call on civil society to be observers of this process and at least document it in a way that maybe it will not overturn the process, because I think there's nothing that's going to overturn the process. I mean, there may be some candidates who may be overturned, and they may be sworn in or not. There's been a lot of questions about some candidates simply don't even have the basic requirements of having,
Absolutely.
their grade, overall grade in law school, for example. I mean, or some of them, I think, even have. So anyway, or some of them are just thinking it's a joke and just maybe they'll just, if they do get elected, they'll just quit. But at the end of the day, maybe we should have done more to document the process, document who these people who are going to be elected, and above all, maybe encourage people to go out and vote for the right the right candidates. But what we did is basically sit back and just said, I'm not going to go out and vote. I don't know if that was a mistake.
So obviously the decision to vote is very personal, but from
Personal.
a political, let's say, science perspective, the
Mhm.
problem with what you're saying on what should civil society or the opposition should have done during the process is that there is a collective action problem, very, I mean, very clear for everyone. It is very difficult to coordinate people to act in the same direction. It is very difficult. And the only way to do it is, in many ways, doing tricks or doing illegal things, which is exactly what the official party is doing, right? All this uh, cheat sheets are clearly illegal. So it is. I'm not judge. I'm not gonna judge those people that are saying we should go and vote and we should have done more and try to influence in selecting better people. But there are many names, Ana Maria. There are just many names. No, no te oigo, perdóname.
Oh, I'm sorry. But and there's also this very, very silly way of using a raffle system, which also just added another level of confusion. I mean, it almost guaranteed that the worst candidates
Absolutely.
became
Yeah.
that the worst people became candidates. You know what I mean? It just guaranteed it. When you have a raffle, you
Yeah.
really cannot assure that the best candidates are going to be elected. Let me ask you this. In you know, there's two ways. I have two questions, and I do really appreciate you joining us today. You know, we're hours away from the elections initiating. Um, what effect is this going to have on Mexico's credibility in the short term? And when I say credibility, you know, we have to negotiate the USMCA starting this year. We're going to have a World Cup next year. You know, there is, the Mexican government is really trying to recruit companies to come invest in Mexico. Does it have a short-term reputational problem? And then the second question, of course, is what does this mean in the long run?
Hmm. In the short term, there will be an impact on Mexico's reputation. There is no question about it. Again, so far, what we've seen is not a fair and open process, but a very directed
Mhm,
process in favor of the government.
mhm,
I think the result, the
mhm,
outcome is going to be that. So when the names come out and everyone understands that the names in the Supreme Court, in the tribunal, in the federal
mhm,
judges are very close to the government,
mhm,
then is when really is going to, I mean, everyone will understand that this is not going to look
no,
good in
not
the
gonna look good.
short term.
No.
Now, just I want to add to that that a lot of companies, Ana Maria, are already, they understand that already. So no
Oh,
one will be,
really?
yeah,
Mhm,
no one will be entirely surprised by this outcome.
mhm, mhm.
And in that sense, companies are already prepared for this worst scenario.
Wow.
Uh, and probably in that sense, I mean, companies are saying very pragmatically, we will have to deal with whatever comes. Okay?
Mhm,
But yeah, reputationally, definitely it will have an impact. And I think it's going to complicate the USMCA. Now,
mhm,
in the long term, I think it's going to have a clear effect and toll on economic growth, Mexico's economic growth potential. So it's very clear that if you are a company that has never worked in Mexico
mhm,
and you are seeing this mess and you don't have any judicial protection, or at least you know that the judicial branch is very close to the government and entirely politicized,
Mhm.
you are going to think twice before investing in the long term in the country. The country still offers enormous opportunities, and a lot of companies will continue to invest in the country. No question about it.
Yeah.
Definitely, it's going to have a toll on our economic growth potential in the long term.
Mhm. Well, promise me you'll come back next weekend and we'll just at least, I mean, we're not going to have results, real results, and for at least 10 days. Maybe we'll know how many people voted. And I
Yes.
think there's going to be a lot of questions in
Yeah.
regards to many candidates. And it's not clear to me that there's going to be any impact in terms of, that maybe or maybe not some candidates will be stripped of their judgeship simply
Yeah.
because they did not fulfill some basic requirements. But at least it'll be interesting to see what happened,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
we have to, and we'll just have to start writing about this. You know what I mean? I
Yeah.
mean, and just kind of maybe warning other countries
Uh,
that what, the best, best practices at least, or maybe just warning them not to do this, not to,
yeah.
not to, not to vote for their judges, ministers, and magistrates, justices. Thank you so much for joining us, Carlos Ramirez. Once again, it's always been a pleasure to have us on your show. Where can people read the report?
Integralia.com.mx. They can download the report there.
Okay, thank you. Have a great weekend, and I'm sure we're going to be very closely watching this process. So we'll speak next weekend. Thank you so much,
Thank
Carlos
you, Ana
Ramirez
Maria. Thank you for
Integralia.
having me.
We're
Bye
gonna
bye.
we're gonna go to a break. I'm Ana Maria Salazar. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Living in Mexico. We'll be back.